and welcome to Hopeful Conversations, brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today, Sonia Arora, a current college counselor at Colorado Academy in the metro area of Denver, holding a Bachelor of Arts in Humanities from Sarah Lawrence College, and earned your MA at Northwestern University in English Literature. Prior to your time at Colorado Academy, she spent time at the University of Chicago as Assistant Director of Admissions and Director of High School Programs, and worked in summer programs at UC Berkeley, Tufts, and Phillips Academy. Thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations. We'll go ahead and get started. As a high school college counselor, what are some things that often are overlooked when applying to college?
That's a great question. The college applications are very robust these days at some schools, and then at other schools, they can be very minimal. Many students these days uh, feel pressure to want to share as much as they can in the context of the application, but the application itself doesn't contain quite enough space for a student to put their whole self into it. And so students have to kind of curate and share information that's really going to help the admissions office get to know them. Sometimes in a small amount of space with one essay or one essay and a short answer question, and sometimes in a longer space where they have a chance to talk about multiple areas of their lives and activities and their academic record and so forth. Your question was what part of the application can be underutilized or can be
Overlooked, possibly?
overlooked by students in the application. Really, the chance for students to share their voice through their writing. Sometimes that's kind of overlooked in importance. Colleges are first and foremost looking at the academic record, so the transcript and sometimes the testing. Um, Sometimes, and then beyond that, they want to know the student. So hearing the student's voice through their writing or through maybe a conversation that they had, an interview process, if there's an interview process that's part of the evaluation, those can be ways for students to really distinguish themselves and share an authentic part of who they are.
A lot to unpack. Trying to sell yourself to that college that you want to go to.
For sure. Although we try not to think about it as selling. We try to think about it as the student finding a match, right? Like really searching for a school that feels like the right fit. Um, And then when the student feels that, the student, really connects with the school on different levels, understands the kind of programming the school offers, finds like a meaningful academic program or meaningful pathways into academic programs. The school also sees that fit in the application, and it seems like more of a match than what it can feel like sometimes initially for students, which is like that they might be trying to, you know, put their whole heart in the hands of strangers to decide the fate of their future. We never want it to feel like that in an ideal scenario.
I like that, a match. That just kind of feels like it takes a little bit of pressure off potentially for a student. What are some ways you have seen students cope with the college application process that may have been successful or unsuccessful for a student?
I'm gonna write my question down so I don't gloss over it this time because I can wander and share so much information. Um, your questions are big in some ways in scale, even though they're hitting some specific targets. So you know, the college process for some kids can start when they're in middle school thinking about athletic recruitment, or they're hearing maybe from a parent who went to a specific institution or seeing an older sibling go through the college process. And other students, it starts a little bit more gradually and naturally when they hit high school or when they're in 11th grade and they see their peers in the next grade already, thinking about the college search and applying to college, and it becomes more of a reality for them. So we have to understand truly that they're not all walking and talking at the same time, like we always say, but they're truly kind of stepping into it gradually when they're ready. Um, so there are ways for students to cope with it when in the context of their school, right? If they're at a high pressure school, coping can mean like sharing information at home around the dinner table once a week. Try not to get involved in too many conversations with friends' parents, or well-meaning neighbors or cousins or aunts and uncles around the Thanksgiving dinner table, who usually have good information to share and want to support the student, but sometimes add an extra layer of pressure to the student who's not ready to talk about their college process or what they're thinking yet. And we always suggest to students that, and kind of give them empowering words and ideas to use in these situations to kind of diffuse the moment and help their relatives or loved ones support them, rather than sort of probe for information that the student has not really arrived at themselves yet. I always tell students at this age, yeah, so it's, when somebody asks at a Thanksgiving conversation, like, "Where did you apply to college?" If a student doesn't wanna go into specifics, they can always say, "Oh, I applied to a couple liberal arts colleges," or, "I'm interested in mid-sized schools," or, "I noticed I have a couple schools that I like on the West Coast." So they can always keep it kind of vague if they don't wanna go deeper into the conversation. Usually, and I myself am guilty of this too, when I see a teenager, especially a 16-year-old or 17-year-old student, a neighbor, I'm very curious to know what they're thinking, because thinking about college and future planning is such a big part of my life. Many people had super positive college experiences themselves. And when they see adolescents at that phase of their journey, they want to tap into that and like reconnect with their own moment, and imagine that future and support that student in that journey. So even though it can be stressful for the student at times because they're in a place of uncertainty, usually the adults in their lives are trying to make conversation, are trying to be helpful in some way or another. It's just that I think for students these days, for kids in this generation, the college application has in the application process has changed so much that when we talk about what it was like 20, 25 years, 30 years ago when their parents applied to college, it can feel like another universe or something that, um, like there's a big rift in understanding between the two, between what parents experience themselves and what the students are going through and feeling as they look at the rankings, the application numbers, and really sometimes opaque information about what colleges truly want to see in the application. Right? They're not spelling it out to you and saying you need to get this specific GPA and this specific test score. They're giving the kind of a ballpark holistic review definition of how many schools evaluate applications. So it can all feel a little bit ambiguous to students, and that ambiguity is challenging.
Yeah. It's changed so much in just even the last few years. My daughter graduated from college. It'll be 2 years ago this spring, and now working with seniors, just the conversation is different, and I don't always know the questions to ask. And just like you said, like, I'm trying to be supportive and, like, engage in conversation, and I'm not trying to do it to be negative or to be, like, nosy. I'm truly trying to be supportive, but sometimes it's a hard conversation to kinda navigate together.
For sure, and some students, they wanna go home and they wanna be chatterboxes. My daughter is already a chatterbox. She just wants to come home and tell and debrief everything until everyone pays attention to her. Every child is different, right? And for some kids, some kids at schools all across the country, they'll apply to one school, or they'll, and it won't be, looming in their mind as heavily as it might be for other students who are exploring multiple options or options across the country and so forth. So there are just so many different ways to apply to college in the US or to look outside the US that we just have to always remember the kids are kind of on their own pathway. And the more they can focus on what they're doing and tune out the noise around them, that the more they'll just be in touch with what they value and what's important to them and what they see as possible in their future.
What advice do you offer to parents of a senior going through the application process? I know, like, often referred to helicopter parents, and I don't know. I heard the best quote. I don't know if this will resonate with you. It was when we were touring colleges, and it was that this was out at NYU. My daughter was interested in applying there, and the college president, he said um, he had changed his, like, advice to parents after going through the college application process with his daughter. so like firsthand experience. And he said, you're riding a tandem bike with your child. And he said, you get to be in the back as the parent and you get to help pedal, but your child is in the front seat and they get to help steer where that bike is going. And he said, I know that's really hard advice for a lot of parents. Um, what is your advice for a parent?
Oh, there's so many elements to this. I'm glad you cited the helicopter parent. There's the lawnmower parent. There's right. These days we can imagine parents in all sorts of roles, but generally, parents are well-meaning and curious. They've thought about this a lot sometimes. We often say, like, when your child is born, you don't look at them and think, where are they going to go to college? But then, you're trying to just get to know your child for who they are, and support them. And that, if you can hold on to that mindset, even through the difficult times, it really does pay off. The other thing that I firmly believe is that the value of taking the long view, right? We as adults who have been through a life journey for decades beyond, these students, can have that long view. But if we can remember the moment, they deserve the chance to have the long view too. The stakes kind of feel more manageable. And just really from a logistics point of view, it helps students if the parent can respond to what the student needs, and be, you know if the student has boundaries that they want the parent to respect, like not posting on social media or not communicating with certain friends and relatives, or not showing up to parties or to work to talk about these parts of their students' private experience, that can be very helpful. Like with anything, right? We want to maintain those boundaries for our children, and respect them. And then for parents, we also, buckling up is also important here. Like you were saying with the tandem bike metaphor, there are going to be times when you're in the back seat. Maybe, you don't even know where the car is going. The car is going in different directions and taking some alternate routes. That's okay, right? That your child is allowed to have that journey and to experience those. um, Sorry, my videos quit for a second. Yeah, all students and children are really allowed to go through that kind of journey without a direct, A to B point. The journey itself is going to teach them so much about who they are and what they need from their college or from their future experience. And that's what you want your child to go through, because then they're going to really arrive at a decision um, that's that's right for them, and it's their decision to own. I've seen parents who feel like they impose their ideas on their child and then later regret it because the child didn't have a chance to kind of really discover themselves in the process. So the more that, again, the process is sort of a time for self-awareness, self-actualization, for sometimes learning and the organizational skills, catching up on those skills so that they're ready to launch to college with that kind of practice, uh, and which college will demand of them for sure. All of those things are wonderful, and I would add a layer to that, which is talking meaningfully about cost of education and not hiding that from your child. Too often, discussing money is very confusing for families, especially when we're talking about a student's dreams and how they might have worked very, very hard to be able to apply to a certain school. But with colleges sometimes costing $80,000 or $90,000 these days, um, you know, some parents feel like they want to try to support their student and achieve, and pursuing their dreams, but um, and then when it becomes a reality to actually pay that price tag, some families hit the brakes and realize it's truly not affordable or not the right investment for them. So it's better to have the conversation really early on, even if your student might feel kind of defeated and kind of frustrated by that. But then the college counselor, or the student working with on their own, can find schools with great merit scholarships, or just that are the right price tag for the family. Um,
There's so many elements that come into it. It's so interesting. Yeah, having the journey. I like how you talk about that, like the process of that, of where they're going to go, not just like the final thing. Where thinking what they're learning during that process. I think that's important. Uh, I feel like in the last few years, decision day is kind of a newer thing that might be very stress provoking for young people. What's your experience with decision day?
Yeah, that's a great question. Decisions come out at so many different times of the year these days. So there could be a couple pinch points starting fairly early on, sometimes in November, sometimes kids are hearing in December. January is another flood of information, and then sometimes in February, we just had decisions come out on Friday for some students. So it's kind of more of a marathon where you're hitting all the water stations than than a sprint to the end, right? Like I think students are over time hearing information from students or through the grapevine or seeing it on social media and just sort of absorbing as they go, like what's coming down the pipeline. Sometimes they'll hear decisions that don't make sense in their minds or decisions that that clearly seemed obvious but didn't happen. So there are all sorts of ways for students to begin contextualizing the decisions that they hear for themselves and for other students. um, all students do typically enroll on May 1st, which is the national deposit deadline or national decision day. So I'm not sure if you were referring to that specifically.
Is that what it is? Yes, that's what it was. I just feel like in the past few years, being like a mother and other mothers my age having children making their decision, like their social media is crazy on May 1st. Like, and how does that make young people feel like if they maybe don't have their, I guess, so does everybody has their decision by May 1st? Is that
Well, there are some students who are still in limbo throughout the process, right? We always really counsel students to be mindful that you don't know who else is in the room with you, virtual room or in a physical space, right? Back 20 years ago, some students would sit around their computers and wait for their decisions to come up together and, you know, prepare to celebrate. But there, of course, could be disappointments built into those moments. No matter what, right, students have to just be supportive of one another, and sometimes that means just like pausing and not broadcasting their decisions or their grief or their celebration immediately, but just taking a moment to kind of gauge what's happening around them before they dive in. We always talk with our seniors about like a grade level agreement they can come to about how they want to handle these moments when decisions are coming down in the pipeline. And typically, they decide that they want this senior lounge to be a safe space where students just kind of like run in and make big announcements or celebrate, or just to kind of keep things a little bit more muted. Other schools take very different approaches. Some schools really want to celebrate those moments, and they pin flags up to celebrate, like when students are admitted to colleges, or students can start wearing their college sweatshirts once they've been admitted to colleges and so forth. So it really depends on the school and the students who are there. But generally, there's a culture right now of like you said, sort of like streaming and our live streaming these moments in our lives. And we check our decisions, or when we're just surrounded by family and friends, and it's very exciting because when students see their decisions on and through their application portals, they see like confetti and balloons and all these really cool things that are so wonderful, and they want to capture those moments. Um, the question is like, does it have to be shared right away? Can it just be more privately shared initially? I mean, this depends on the student and the family and their social media community. But generally, we always advise a little bit of caution out of respect to everybody around you. So
it's tough. I've worked with students now for like the last 4 years and seen kids in their decision making process and like can you talk about the different like safety schools or how kids kind of put into different categories the types of schools that they might be applying to?
yeah, that's a great question. So I think that more generally, you're kind of talking about how to build a balanced list, a balanced college list, and how to think about balance and how to think about what school is an appropriate reach or match or target school for you, and what strategy your student might use in the process or you might use in the process. So this this particular time, the college process kind of forces students to. It's a moment when students become a little bit more aware of where they are academically in the scale of their class or in the applicant pools. And some students choose to kind of have a very contained process where they're applying to schools they know they'll get into based on the statistics. There are all sorts of great resources for assessing statistics. Colleges provide information on their websites. There's something called a common data set, which all colleges are required to produce, and that contains a lot of really detailed information about admission statistics, how many male identifying students applied, how many female identifying students applied, how many of each were admitted, just kind of what students were in different parts of the applicant pool, early decision or early action or rolling or regular notification or regular decision. And then even details about like the GPA spreads for students and the test score spreads for students who are admitted. And looking at all that information, you can students can figure out in some ways where they fit into the puzzle. But there's also a lot of ambiguity built in, as we said. You know, while you might have a 4.0 at your school or a 4.0 GPA, your college, a specific college, might recalculate that GPA when you apply, and they might take out certain courses or electives that they don't see as part of your core academic GPA, and then they might do a recalculation. So there's still an element of it that will always be a bit out of one's control. Um, my uh, my husband, who's also a college counselor, used to say that when students are applying, like you're in a big bowl of Chex Mix or trail mix, and you don't know if and colleges are trying to create a class of students that are representative from all over the country, right, and all over the world, and that bring together students who might be suitable for different majors or different extracurricular activities. They don't all want, no college wants a school or a class full of class presidents or full of debaters, or that only has science research kids, or that only has jugglers. Or that only has trumpet players, right? But in that mix, when colleges are thinking about the trail mix, you don't know if they think that you're a peanut or a pretzel or whatever it might be, right? Like they're thinking about what's their institutional priorities at their school. So that part of it is always kind of out of your control, even if your numbers. It's in more selective schools, it's out of your control, even if your numbers are kind of aligning with what the general applicant pool for admitted students with where that is. Anyway, so this again, it's just a really important time to be realistic, to follow to look at the statistics, to uh, to have appropriate numbers of reach schools. We hate to see students just exhausting themselves working on applications for schools that statistically are unlikely to admit them, because it just takes away the energy that they have from for investing in other schools that might truly offer them admission. So again, like the balance of the list is huge, and I would always encourage students and families to look at the statistics and try to keep things kind of like contained to not over 15 schools, ideally maybe like 10 schools or fewer. That's very manageable for students.
Okay, here's a question related
Okay.
more to the students that you serve. What would you tell a student worried about not getting in anywhere or worried about what their classmates have to say about where they end up?
It's interesting. I think to speak to the first part of your question, and on some level, uh, all students arrive in the college process and think they're not going to get in anywhere. And sometimes we show them just graphs of information for schools that will absolutely admit them, to just give them that assurance that they will have options. It's so it's sometimes hard to believe until you start getting in places. Um, we again, like you in your prior question, you asked about the balance of the list. That's so crucial. When we're working with students, we absolutely require that they have balanced lists so that they're not in a position where they're not getting in anywhere. Very rarely that can happen at some schools. I've never experienced that, but I've worked at 4 schools as a college counselor, but I've never experienced that, but it can happen, and then there are schools with later deadlines that sometimes take applications, but, for the most part, it's just a common fear that students face, and it's also can be a feeling of, like, a potential public fear, like the second part of your question, right? How do you be part of a classroom community or and face your peers when you may have not gotten into your dream school. And I always say it's important to know that that is an experience that almost everybody in the grade will have on some level or another, right? Of not applying to that school or getting denied from that school, pivoting to a new a new option. Um, it's just really important for students to feel excited about the places they are applying, everywhere that they're applying, and then to realize that so much is under their control once they go to college, right? College is still what you make of it. And you can go to any of these schools and be unhappy, right? And you can go on or you can go on your pathway and figure out ways to make a school work for you, right? To make a big school feel smaller for you or to make a small school feel bigger for you, to kind of really find your niche and be engaged and productive. And usually that happens. If not, students these days, especially after the pandemic, there was so much uncertainty. Students were looking to transfer and change their mind about their majors and so forth. Sometimes students face financial hardships that cause them to change. So this is taking the long view again can really help um, cushion some of those experiences that will be difficult along the way.
I like that you said like excitement about their choice and their decision. I've had that conversation with a young person. They made their decision, and just the way that they like said where they were going to go to school compared to the other students that I work with, because I usually have about 5 kids that work for me each, and they're always seniors. And I had to pull the student aside and like give a little bit of coaching about like how you are presenting your choice. Like you can still be really proud. Like you don't and what you're bringing to the table. Like it's going to be a great experience for you. It might not be, but the language that you use in presenting your choice, like yeah, it might not be Stanford, it might be Colorado State University, but let's own it. You're going to Colorado State University. Like be proud of that.
Exactly. And there are so many, this is such a cool time to go to college because there's so many amazing schools out there with amazing programs, right? Like all these colleges are competing with each other. They're pouring money into building programs, pouring money into students, scholarships, everything, dorms. I mean, they're incredible. They're an incredible variety and breadth of places to be at, and in some ways they're more similar than not because they're all trying to like fight for these same students. So it's a very exciting time to go to college. I think for parents, our parents that we work with, when they start touring these schools, schools that maybe they hadn't heard of 30 years ago or 20 years ago, they realize that you can be any of these places and do something incredible with your life, and that's what we want to see our students having, that feeling of power and agency, um, to to go out into the world and lead meaningful lives.
That's a really good perspective. Such a good perspective. Okay, we have one last question. We end every podcast. And that question is, what does the world need to hear right now?
Um, what does the world need to hear right now? It is mid-February, and college decisions are going to come out in the months ahead. Uh, I think every year we get around the country, people get worked up in a frenzy about how selective colleges will be and how impossible it will be to go to college in the future, and how we need to be applying to more colleges than ever before, and how we need to have higher test scores, or we need to have more extracurriculars or a higher GPA. It's very easy to focus on things that are seemingly under our control and to do math and calculations in our minds about what the odds are. But all of that can be really limiting and destructive. It can really overshadow a student's high school years, and what they can accomplish in the course of their 4 years of high school. So as I would say to our students, to our families, and to families and students around the country, really enjoy high school and figure out who you are, make friends, lose friends, take classes that are interesting to you, not just because you think they'll look good to colleges. Do something that feels authentic for yourself, because the more you focus on that in high school, the more you'll have something a story to share in your college application, one, and then the more enjoyable your life will be, the more purpose you'll have when you go to college, the more direction you'll have about what you might want to do in college. This is still a safe time to take risks and to fail, and we don't want students and families to think that they have to be perfect or that anybody is perfect. Imperfect is really interesting, and imperfect can lead to all sorts of meaningful adventures and experiences in one's future. So don't fear that failure. Don't fear that rejection letter. Don't fear the test score. Don't fear the what if I didn't, for all those stories, there are stories of students who did everything, quote, right, and then have the quote right outcomes or what the expected outcomes. So it's really just worth focusing on the student and the individual.
It's perfect. I like that. Sounds like slow down and enjoy high school a little bit more. College will
Yeah,
work its
slow
hard
down.
process. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we had a little bit of issues getting to here, but I think this conversation is going to be helpful for our listeners. All of those questions were written, or most of them were written by a student. So that's the perspective that we try to bring, but helpful for parents as well. So thanks so much for joining me today on a hopeful conversation. And be sure to tune in next time to our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends.